Hey everyone, Scott Cook here. Yep, I'm back at it, Kerbal Space Program. I did take a bit of a break for a couple of weeks, and I understand that some of you were kind of getting a little antsy for me to keep going here, so I'm back at it. Hopefully I won't take any more too long breaks. Just had a few things in my life that had to get addressed before we could really spend a lot more time on this. Anyway, this is the Jool vehicle that we brought out, all the probes and the to their energy, so I'm going to be bringing this back to Kerbin so I can use it to carry out more equipment to Laythe. As you see, when I had the throttle up when I accidentally turned on the engine when I was decoupling here, so no biggie though. So we're going to head back to Kerbin. So the first thing to do with the warp drive is you target Kerbin, and then I'm going to aim basically directly for it here. And as long as the planets are more or less in a parallel axis, you should be able to make speed. Again, I'm not an expert on this device. It's still kind of difficult for me to use, but as I've kind of figured out, as long as I'm kind of, going in a straight line and my speed isn't too high, I should be able to get captured by Kerbin. As you can see here, the first attempt I was a little off the mark, and we're coming in actually on the southern pole of Kerbin, quite low. So I'm going to have to stop here in a sec and readjust. Now I'm fairly close to Kerbin at this point. That's the light greenish ring that you can see all the stuff going on here. Now once I stop, reorientate towards the mark on the globe again and basically push the button to go. Now I didn't hotkey this device, which might have saved me a little bit of grief, but nevertheless I can still make it work. We're just coming in now again. We're still going to be coming in a bit on the southern pole of Kerbin in general. As you can see here, my got to make one more adjustment. Now because we're in the sphere of influence of Kerbin, the globe changes. So now instead of targeting Kerbin, I just basically aim toward the planet on the globe, as you can see here. And then we just push it again. Now we got to be careful we don't go directly at the center of that globe, or you'll fly right into Kerbin. Straight into it. As you can see here, you can see the planet coming in on my right side. Again, still got to do a little bit of adjustments, but we're getting closer and closer. And there's a couple of tricks that you can use with this. So for example, if you're going away from Kerbin, or if you go past it, as you can see here, I'm still on an exit trajectory, but because the gravity is actually pulling me back toward Kerbin, it's helping to slow me down a little bit. And from this point on, I'm going slow enough that I can just use my conventional engines to bring my velocity down enough to get captured by Kerbin's sphere of influence, since we're not going very fast at all at this point. So as you can see here, just burning a little bit of delta V doesn't take too much effort, and pretty soon I get a camera change here, which indicates to me that I am on a capture orbit from Kerbin. And I'm just waiting for it. There it is. So as the camera shifts, you can see now I'm in a capture orbit, but right now it looks kind of bad because I'm going to go through Kerbin. Not the best place, but the good news is we're actually heading toward the apoapse at this point. And I'm rotating in the right direction, so all I need to do is a minor correction at apoapse to get my orbit so that I'm no longer on a collision course, and I can use Kerbin to aerobrake a little bit, bring my speed back down and bring my orbit closer to the planet. And that will allow me to pick up more equipment to take back out to Laythe using the same equipment that I used to go out there in the first place. So after a little bit of tweaking, I finally got a maneuver that I'm happy with, and we're just going to speed up time. Now I'm still carrying that front cradle that brought all the stuff out, and it's basically garbage, so I just decouple it here. It can crash into the planet, which is kind of good because then I don't have to worry about Kessler syndrome. There's no fuel in it because all my RCS in this vehicle is gone. It's all just under torque of the vehicle. So just moving ahead, then we're just going to do that correction that we talked about quickly here, and once we get to that point, there we go. Once we get this done, then I could just wait for it to aerobrake. And in the meantime, I'll start bringing up the equipment that's going to go out to Laythe. We're going to put a Kerbal station over there that's going to have lots of room to park people in and things like that in case I need it. I spent a lot of time deciding how I was going to do it. I did have some maintenance to do on locally, like my nuclear reactor here that's supplying all this power has actually burned through all its fuel. And I didn't realize that until I just kind of checked on it. And then I was going to shut it down and reprocess all the fuel, but turns out it was already shut down, and the Kerbin couldn't get anything to pop up when I was right-clicking on it. And I'm not sure why it was doing that. So anyways, it looks like it was shutting down, so I was just waiting for it to cool off, and then would reprocess all the actinides and waste fuels that the vehicle heads. The other thing I needed to take care of was I needed to pull that one puller vehicle that I have out at the nuclear reactor back to Kerbin, because Jeb and Bob are stuck in there, and they've been stuck in there with no fuel for a long time now. I'm not sure exactly how long, but I wanted to get them back, so I decided to use this vehicle, which is currently at the moon, that pulled part of the space station out there, to go and pick them up and bring them back home, because then I can use them again for new missions rather than just, you know, letting them die or just letting them sit in that cockpit. It's got to be pretty stinky at this point. You know what I mean? So this is a pretty standard maneuver. We just basically accelerate until we break the moon's sphere of influence here, and once we do that, then I just basically set up a rendezvous with the nuclear reactor. On top of this, I also have another vehicle rotating around the moon. It was the vehicle that brought out all the probes that I'm using to set up relay, or that I used to set up all the relays. This is the vehicle here that I was going to actually rendezvous with the lunar space station, and it's going to refuel, and I'll probably bring it back to Kerbin as well, because I might be able to use it in another polar mission later on or something along those lines. It's going to be one of those vehicles that's going to see multiple use, if you might remember this one here. Now, I'm just going to time accelerate a bit until we get to the maneuver node. Just going to bring it down so that it has a rendezvous with the space station, and we'll just dock it there. I'll have to dump its cradle at some point, because the cradle is basically just useless weight that's pulling on the back, that it was used to pull out all the probes. And then from there, it will see more action, I guess. Anyways, I was just playing around with some maneuver nodes here, trying to get it a little bit more adjusted. In the meantime, I also had to do one more change of sphere of influence here. The probe that I have out at Jool has now been picked up by Pole, the moon that looks like a popcorn kernel. So we're just going to have to do a maneuver here, set up a maneuver here that will allow me to remain in its sphere of influence. Then we can start scanning Pole for various usable products. Whether I actually need them or not, we'll see in the future. Laythe right now is the resource center that I'm going to be basically focusing on, with the reactors, or excuse me, not the reactors, the factories in the Interstellar mod. From Laythe, you can, its oceans specifically, you can pull everything you need to make fuel, oxidizer, and monopropellant. And I'll get more into that later, but I'm thinking, because Laythe is also very similar to Kerbin in a lot of ways, that's kind of the place I'm going to be using as my base of operations. Since the whole planet is basically water, you can, and all the products that you need to make the fuel and monopropellant all come out of the water. All I really need to do is land a vehicle on there that can stay in the water, pull everything it needs, and then from there haul it all back up to the space station so that the space station can get resupplied. Now that was an interesting challenge for me in a lot of ways, because Laythe, even though its gravity and its atmosphere are lighter and easier to get out of than Kerbin's, they still presented a pretty significant challenge over, say, the moon or anything like that, because you still have to generate enough delta V and force to pull all that weight out of there. And the vehicle that I came up with was rather interesting, and I will be showing you that towards the end of this video here. Right now, this is just the one vehicle that I had in orbit around the moon that was bringing the probes out. It's just docking with the lunar space station to get a top up on fuel before it starts its trek back to Kerbin. Yeah. I built a lot of these vehicles to be reusable in a certain sense. I mean, unless it's a space station or an actual habitat of some sort, I wanted to make sure that most vehicles could be, serve more than one purpose. That being said, I also wanted to make, each one of my space stations unique, because I didn't want to just pull the same parts out to each one. I thought it would be cooler. So the lunar stations served me very well. I'm going to have to make a kethane hull out of there at some point. I also intend to stay with the current build of Kerbin space program that I'm using. I didn't want to upgrade to the new 0.5 with the asteroid redirects, because some of the mods I'm using weren't ready for it. And I thought about it, and updating right now, I think there's an Interstellar update at this point that I could probably use as well. I am thinking about getting that for the next one, or the next episode. We shall see how it goes. I'll give it a try maybe this week to see if it doesn't cause me any major issues, and hopefully no glitches. We all know that occasionally Kerbal runs into some problems, but that's just because it's always being updated. And hey, it's fun. I mean, modding the snot out of your program like I do tends to introduce problems that the developers might not have seen. And that's fine. So the next vehicle that we're going to be bringing up is the first section of the Laythe space station. This is basically using cabins from B9 Aerospace and a few other parts from KW Rocketry to make kind of a usable habitat. It's also going to be basically a fuel storage point. Like this center section is going to store most of the fuel that this space station is going to hold for most of the trip. The other thing is it's also got several docking ports to be used as a docking collar, and from there I will be attaching the next section, which will be a power section. It's going to keep it supplied with power during its use. Plus, since I'm kind of in the Jool system and the system is full of antimatter, it's one of the most dense areas of antimatter in the Kerbal system, it's going to use antimatter to power it. Now, you might be asking, well, you just put a giant relay system in there that's producing 4.5 gigawatts of power, why don't you just use that? And the answer is simple. It's because when I'm flying around the Laythe planet and I need to go down and come back with fuel, the propulsion system that my lander is going to be using is based on antimatter. Now, remote power might work, but with the engine configuration I had to come up with, it might not be enough to just use the remote power. And so I decided to go with a space station design that would collect antimatter as well. It won't collect it as fast as the Jool one does, but it would still be enough to power everything, and on top of that provide energy to the system that is set up. So this is the power section of the Laythe. I'm just going to launch it to meet up with the habitat section. From there, I'm going to launch the vehicle that's the lander vehicle to Laythe, and that is going to be the last section. I'm considering the Laythe lander part of the overall station because of its size and its complexity. It also does carry a bit more fuel so that it will store it in the space station while it's docked with it. So it's just, I kind of approached this problem because I went through, I think, 3 or 4 iterations of the actual vehicle that will be landing before I came up with the final design, simply because the challenges it presented really had to do some serious digging into what I had available to me with Interstellar mod and the various other mods that I had to come up with something that would really work, something that was reusable, something that basically was a rocket-based SSTO, because you can't runway a space plane into the water, that'll just tear it apart. So it basically had to do a straight down drop kind of system. I ended up using balloons, which I think will work out really well. To get that SSTO that I'm going to be using off Laythe off the ground back into space, what I'm going to end up using is the DT Vista internal fusion engine, the laser pumped one that uses 2 nuclear fission products, and it also requires 2.5 gigawatts of power to take off and land constantly while it's providing thrust. It has some unique quirks that I'll get into a little bit later here as we're talking about it, but generally it worked out fairly well, at least up until I got to the point where I was docking with it, but more on that later. Here I'm just docking together the 2 sections of the Laythe space station here, the power section and the habitat section. This will basically be the permanent fixture around Laythe that's going to provide the fuel and the energy for travel throughout the Jool system if bringing stuff into the system and I need to refuel it and bring it back, stuff like that. So that this will be a permanent fixture, but I'm building it in Kerbin's atmosphere first, mostly as a test run. Make sure that it goes together fairly well, make sure it's easy. Plus I'm going to be using that warp ring, that Accubear drive ring that I'm bringing back to Earth, to connect to it and haul the entire system out to Laythe again. Hopefully I can get it within enough time frame that Jool's orbit doesn't get too far away from Kerbin's, and I can get it out there and it won't be too difficult to capture. Anyways, we've got to dump the junk like usual. It's just standard procedure for me to get rid of stuff so that I don't have Kessler syndrome flying around my planets. It's not usually a huge threat, but it is, you know, a bit of a lag. And I'm noticing that, like, I think I got almost 30 flights going in this game now, in total, and I got to be careful because I don't want to get too leggy or too, you know, too many problems that could be instilled with this. And I've had a few issues in the past with these mods, just kind of coming up with minor issues. I had one time there a few episodes back where my save file corrupted, and when I loaded the game it didn't give me any warning, and I popped in there and it erased a whole bunch of my flights because they were using quote-unquote parts that didn't exist, but they were there, they just weren't loaded, and I had to recover my quick save and I had to do some repairs, and it wasn't fun. I'm hoping to avoid that in the future. We're just about done here, but this was a bit of a difficult docking procedure. I believe I had some trouble with parts rotating and having to get rid of junk and all that fun stuff. But in the end, we get her back together, and it's not too bad. Coming in for the final dock here. I'm using the 3.75 docking ports that came with KW Rocketry because they just provide a really solid base, and they don't wiggle and shift like some of the smaller docking ports do. Most of the cooling will be handled by the power section. It's going to be exclusively powered by antimatter that's going to collect, and I'm also going to need antimatter fuel collected by the station for storage, because the drop section that's going to be carrying fuel back and forth from the planet's surface also needs antimatter to run on. There's no intermediate power source I have that will do the same job and be able to carry it out. It's definitely an interesting challenge, that's what's for sure. I did struggle with that quite a bit. Alright, now we're getting back to the vehicle that's coming into the orbit to pick up the ship that I have at the nuclear reactor that's got Jeb and Bob in it. I'm going to attempt to rescue them, or at least bring that vehicle back down to Earth, because there was a major problem with it. And for some reason, when I was building it, I must have blocked the doors that Bill and Jeb could have gotten out of, and they can't EVA out of the vehicle at all. And that vehicle was never designed to come back down to the planet. So I've either got to kill them, or I've got to get it back down to the planet somehow. So my thought was I was going to bring it back, and we're just getting set up for a rendezvous here with the reactor. But I'm going to try to bring it back to the station close to the planet here. I'm going to park it there, and then I'm going to send up something to try to bring it down. Now this is just finishing a little maneuver around Pole, the satellite probe around there. I want a polar orbit again just to kind of go through and find all those wonderful little resources if I ever need them. I'm not sure what kind of expansion I have, but it's good to have these sort of systems in place to sort of scout it out, see what we have available. Also got to be careful with these probes, because if those antennas stay open for too long, they will overheat and shut down the system, and I don't want that. So I only open the microwave receivers on those when I'm actually doing maneuvers, and then once I'm done, I close them again to make sure that the heat stays at a reasonable temperature. Alright, just finishing off the maneuver, making sure that we get it reasonably straight. Doesn't have to be perfect, but close. And we just turn on all that stuff to see what we've got. Now, I'm not going to find too much antimatter around a planet body that doesn't have any atmosphere. And I did some little research on what I could find around Mars, and, excuse me, not Mars, Duna and Eve, but we'll get back to that. So now, again, just kind of cleaning up this last little bits of space missions that get people safely home and whatnot. So just got this tugger here at the reactor. I'm just going to finish off its approach a little bit, and then I'm going to decouple the tugger that's got Jeb and Bob in it, and we're going to just connect with this ship, and we're going to push it all the way home. That's all they're going to do. I'm really hoping I can come up with something to save Jeb and Bob, because I mean, come on, they're cosmonauts and they're kind of the first guys up, and they've been stuck in a station. They kind of had a bum rap, so I haven't really approached that problem just yet, but I will soon. Also, I'm trying to get the reactor here started to process the fuels, but I'm having some issues with it. I'm not sure if it's a bug or not. I'll have to do a little bit more checking into it. Nevertheless, we decouple this, and it's got enough RCS fuel to dock itself, so I'm just going to use that. Once it's back to the antimatter factory, which is the station I've got around Kerbin, we're going to just dock it there, and I'm going to send up a rescue mission. I don't know what that will entail yet. Since Bill and Jeb are stuck in the cab, I can't get them out. That means I got to bring the entire vehicle down and try to land it somehow so that the cabin survives. Now that's going to be an interesting challenge, because the only way I can attach stuff to it is with the docking ports on the front and the back. So I'm hoping I can come up with some kind of a system, and I think I'm going to end up having to use balloons or something along those lines to try to attach to the front and back to give it a nice, stable, slow entry once we hit the thicker atmosphere around 25 kilometers up, so that the balloons, like the balloons that I'm going to attach or something along those lines, won't rip the docking ports off. Anyway, after we get attached, then we just wait for the rotation so that it's ideal to connect to the space station. I give her some gas, and I realize, why the hell am I going the wrong way? And then I realized I was still driving from the wrong docking port. So we flip it around and go back, waving at the nuclear station as we go by again. Little goof, it happens. Nice thing about the Interstellar mod is that, there it goes. You know, the fuel efficiency is very high with most of the engines on them, so it's always really nice. So you can have a little bit more fun playing around with rockets as opposed to being very stringent with your delta V requirements to make specific maneuvers. So, and we're coming up on the antimatter fact, and I kind of blew past it a little bit because I was going a bit fast. Oh well, like I said, nobody's perfect. And we're just going to come in and dock this sucker on the end, and we're going to park it there until I get back to it in the next episode, or the episode after that, depending on what happens. Yes, I do intend to make more episodes. I do intend to also start maybe doing some videos on some other games too, but more on that in another section. I'm not going to spill over into Kerbal. And pretty standard docking procedure here, just trying to get that docking port I have on the end of the cabin there. And we're just going to basically put this there, make a nice long chain of ships / space station. And from there we will, like I said, just leave it there until I can get something up to it. I'll probably do that early next episode, but we'll see what happens. So while I'm doing this standard procedure, it's pretty straightforward, I'm going to talk a little bit about my nuclear reactor that I have currently supplying. It was the very first vehicle I put into orbit when I started this series. I'm finding it hard to maintain because that very large size nuclear reactor tends to burn fuel very quickly. As you can see here, I burnt out all those containers that I brought up to it in a relatively short amount of time. And I need to maintain it, and getting stuff out to it has always been a bit of a problem, so I might be redesigning my original system. I probably might put a probe in its place just so that I have the 3 rings, and then have maybe a station closer to Kerbin generating power, or I may just start to rely entirely on the Mun and Minimus to start beaming power. I haven't decided yet. We'll get more into that as I need to. First things first, though, I'd have to do something with it. Not exactly sure what. It's got enough fuel, and as long as I can get the reactor going again, it's got more than enough power to run that engine to fly it back into Kerbin. Anyway, now that the docking is done, this is the SSTO rocket I was telling you about that's going to be my Laythe lander. It's got the 3 balloons on each side that are basically going to carry it up. It requires a little bit of antimatter to fly. Now, I had to cheat the file a little bit, so please don't hate. To give me just enough antimatter to get it off the surface, because I could have built like a space station, or excuse me, a science lab on it or something like that to generate it, but I mean, then I'd have to eject it off somehow. And I thought about that, and I just decided, you know what, let's just do it the easy way. I only gave myself 100 antimatter to get me off the planet, just to show you how efficient this vehicle is. It's using the DT Vista internal fusion engine from Interstellar. Now, the problem with this engine, it only comes in one size. It comes in the 3.75 size. It emits radiation as you're using it, meaning if any kerbins are EVAing or in other vehicles, there's actually a danger to them. They can kill them just by being in its proximity as it's running. The other thing about it too is it requires 2.5 gigawatts of constant power to run. Doesn't matter how low the throttle is or how high the throttle is. It's a constant requirement. The interesting thing about this engine is it's incredibly powerful, but the throttle also scales its efficiency. So, for example, when you're using very little throttle, you're actually getting very high ISP. When you're using high throttle, you actually lose ISP, but at the same time you get pretty insane thrust. As you can see here, it's the very first quote-unquote rocket SSTO that I've ever built. It didn't require any lift from the wings. I did put some little winglets on it from the B9 just to help with the ascent and descent through the atmosphere. But just to give you some numbers for some of these that are interested, the ISP of this engine sits at about 15,500 at full throttle. At 1% throttle, it sits at about 1.5 million ISP. Now that's some pretty insane numbers for KSP, which is actually quite good, making this engine very good for long haul. Now again, these numbers I'm pulling directly off the GitHub that Fractal UK and its Interstellar mod wiki that they've sort of put up, so they may be subject to change in the future. Now, when I was also building this vehicle, I also didn't realize this at the time, I mentioned it earlier, but the radiation from it actually can kill a kerbin. And I didn't realize that that included ones in other vehicles, even though they were in their cockpits. So that actually presented a bit of a problem, and I think it was about 2 kilometers out from the station. I couldn't use the engine to get any closer. I had to do it all on RCS thrust, which turns out to be horribly inefficient and burned the majority of my RCS thrust to get out there. So even though this vehicle will work, I may end up landing this particular one and rebuilding or just tweaking the design a little bit, and we'll be on to iteration 5, I think, of it just to make it work. However, for everything else, it does work. The other thing I had to be careful of is those factories, the large round sections on the bottom that actually do the resource harvesting, are very delicate. Even though I strutted them up as well as I could, if I hit the water with any lateral velocity going side to side instead of pretty much straight down, there's a really good chance I'm going to rip them right off the vehicle. And I tweaked it and played with it, and there's just no way around it. You just basically got to hit the water almost coming straight down. So that means I need to bleed off a lot of speed in orbit before I come down on Laythe. That being said, so that's not too bad. Again, that's another good reason why this engine is great. Now, it may kill all the fledgling life on Laythe because of the radiation, but hey, we need those resources, right? And Laythe's water will actually provide enough energy, or excuse me, enough resources to basically supply the entire mission with everything that I needed. In any case, this was for the most part a fairly successful test of my Laythe system, or my Laythe space station. A few hiccups to work out, specifically with that radiation problem. I don't want to be crispifying my Kerbals, especially if there's, you know, long-term accommodations available to them on the station. Just that little bit of a docking approach, and this is basically Laythe Station. That last section I consider part of the station because it'll also hold fuel for me as well. So there we go. So next episode I'm going to get that Alcubierre ring out to it, and we're going to haul her out to Laythe, and we're going to basically start mining there. This is Scott Cook saying thanks for watching, and you have a great day. We'll see you later.